Invisible or only just. The thing about being a girl, she said, is you can't see inside. That's part of the mystery. Look, the camellia has opened and you still can't see in. You're crinkled with secrets, a fire opal caught in searchlight.
Shemai, Ruth, it's such a pleasure to be here in your garden talking to you about poetry. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a great pleasure. I wish I could respond in Welsh.
And I'll start by asking you, how did poetry begin?
Well, my mother used to read to me, and she found and I found that I just knew the poems, some of the poems by heart. You know, Kipling, for instance, Kipling in the Jungle Book, there were poems in between, you know, and I used to just know them. I loved them. I think it was the music, you know. And a deer leapt up, and a deer leapt up from the pond in the wood where the wild deer sup. You know, it was the rhythm, it was the mixture of vowels, I think, vowels and words and ideas and pictures in my head and the music of it. So she claimed that she had a poem I'd written when I was 3, and I don't believe it. And anyway, I can't ask her now. But I did always. I used to sleep with a book, a big fat black book called The Book of 1,000 Poems, and I liked animals too, and so I knew the animals ones by heart. And I didn't have to try. It just happened. We did quite a lot of music at home, and I think music and singing and poems and singing were sort of interchangeable for me in a way. Okay, this is from a little pamphlet I wrote a few years ago called Watershed. It was before all the attention on water had come out, but there was still lots out there about what is happening to our rivers in Britain. And so it's a mixture of environment and myth. Lady of the lake and the translucent sperm of microplastics in rain, in our food, in every human placenta, probably the placentas of water voles too, swimming towards their breakfast of floating flowers, as if the divided fishtail of Melusine waved at the weir below the factory and smothered the whole surface in froth, islands and pinnacles, shredding away from their own crests, glimmering like netrin on a ball gown, gossamer breaking to quicksilver, and a white hand thrust up through the whole mess, offering a sword and a tambourine to every river in Arthurian England, bubbling with iridescent chemicals, prescription drugs, raw sewage released into the veins of every current 400,000 times a year. Everything we need to think about and don't. The Atlantic jet stream speeding up. Australia, Spain, California on fire. And children all over the globe injected with a blast of climate terror, climate guilt, straight into the hippocampus, as if a pub in that crystal cave at the end of the world held a darts match for the blind, and the boards were our bodies, our hearts.
Concerns about climate change is a dominant theme for many poets today, but you have of course been voicing climate concerns for a very long time, and there is that family connection of fascination with the natural world. Your 2023 pamphlet Watershed evokes the power of water and climate change denial. I'd be interested to hear how environmental concerns have shaped your writing over the years.
But in this pamphlet, I was thinking about how one of the big forces of the human capacity to cope with threat. It's not a very good strategy, but it is one that the mind does often, is denial. So I was thinking in terms of denial, and because the poem's about water, I was thinking of the mind as a kind of well, rather like Freud thought of the unconscious as a sort of cauldron. People seal over and try and deny it exists, but then it comes bubbling up through the floor and so on. So it was denial is one of the terrifying forces of the human psyche. I don't know if you saw that film, Don't Look Up, yes. But the ability not to look up and to make other people not look up too is absolutely terrifying. It's a question really how nature shades into environmental. I mean, I've always been involved with nature ever since I can remember, and my mother and my grandmother and my father, in a sense, they always showed us things, they commented on things, we took binoculars on family walks and bird watching and so on. So nature in every form, particularly wild, the wilder the better, was always a part of my life from the beginning, and is part of a sense of who I am. But I studied Greek and Latin at college and did a thesis on that, and I noticed nature coming into it more and more, into what I was thinking and into that work itself, and then into what I was thinking and writing about. But I didn't really head-on address wild things until I wrote this book on wild tigers and took the origin of species with me as I went on the journeys. And I also found animals come in as a metaphor. We all think with animals from the beginning. From cave art. The cave artists in the Ice Age were what were they painting? They were painting animals. We think ourselves with animals. We use animals to think with and feel with and see ourselves in. And I was doing that without sort of noticing, in a way. But then I began to realize through this conservation book that what a terrible state the world is in. And it's not only climate change is coming on top of centuries of gradual degradation and pollution of the earth. So the catastrophe in nature today, the crisis of nature today, is a crisis of thinning. There are technical words for how every generation it's normalized. For instance, I can remember when I was a child, if you drove at night, your windscreen and your headlights would be full of insects. There were so many insects in the air, they would be full of them. You had to wipe them off. Now I can drive through the night and not have a single insect on my windscreen. That's how normal it is. My daughter does not know what I saw she doesn't. I can tell her, but it's not the same as seeing it and feeling it for yourself. And that is, in very small, the experience of every generation getting used to the thinning of nature. But in a sense, when you're writing poems, you can't just mourn. It can't. Maybe all poetry is about loss in a way, but it's recollection. A grief recollected in tranquility, and the very recollection is itself a sort of loss. But just to write about loss and anger is no good. You have to make a real poem out of it. Or a real work, whatever it is. So, for instance, in this book, which is a novel, it's about a cobra conservation in India partly, but it's also the conservationist. He lives down in the West Country, and he also loves the woods of Devon, and he sees a terrible badger fight staged by men, completely illegal, and our inhumanity to nature and the way we abuse it is, I suppose, a big theme with me. But I have to do it carefully because I mind so much about it, I suppose. I'm going to read just a few poems from Girl. This is a book which came about because I had two sequences, one on the Virgin Mary, seeing her as a girl surprised by an angel and what happens to her, and another one on snake goddesses in Minoan Crete. And I took them to my editor, and she said, but look, we need a bridging passage. And actually that became the heart of the book. And it's really about my reflections on Girl. I wrote it when I was 77. And am I still a girl? Do I feel like a girl? What is a girl? I'm thinking about my mother as a girl, my daughter as a baby, and now she's just had a baby herself. So when do you stop being girl? Or do you just add to the layers? And meanwhile, what in this age of rising misogyny, what is a girl? What is a girl's experience? As soon as she steps out into the world, she's going into a world whose imagination is shaped by men, by the male gaze and the power of men. What is that? How is that for girls today? So these questions rose up again and again as I wrote. But I thought I'd start with a very gentle poem about my own daughter discovering her feet, when my daughter discovered her feet in the bath. Both of us in Wonderland, learning how to be together, and a new dance going on in your brain. Neural pathways. I dreamed of soft green fern uncurling in a forest. I placed a plastic basin on the table, filled it with warm water, and plucked you like soft fruit from your pram. It was all discovery, for me, for you. You plashed water on the table, like crystal drops from the fountain of immortality, gathered by wandering psyche in a box. You laughed. You loved baths, and hands were easy. You clutched everything in reach. But when your feet moved, you stared like an alchemist whose stone really did turn gold. What were these objects at the end of things? You moved one, replaced it. I saw you think it through, a connection between what you felt, what you did, and some change in the view. There was more to this world. There is always more than you knew. So skip forward 20 years, and she's still using her feet in a slightly upsetting way to me. My daughter goes to work in a conflict zone. I'm in the kitchen when you come in from packing. An observer in armed conflict. Yes, there's danger. Yes, that's true, but it's managed. Great. You are off to Colombia to protect campesino families from paramilitaries. I remember holding my breath when you played Carmen Fantasy at an end-of-term concert. Then, studying a road map of Europe, trying to work out where you could have got to when you hitchhiked to Morocco your first year in college. Now, for a second, worrying about the FARC, about whom I know pretty well nothing, but everyone has vivid ideas. I forget to celebrate the way you want to step out in the world on your own feet. It feels like my heart buzzing round the planet in a different body. I plunge back to when I really knew you were safe, when we brought home a puppy and you snuggled with her on the sofa in your soft blue mothercare pajamas. Or right back when you were 2 and we tracked a beetle crawling along a seashore across twigs of wind-snapped mimosas. But the world needs girls. That's the deal. They have to explore. The goddess of earth made a fuss about her daughter going into the dark. But I try to squeeze down the lump in my throat, always the first part of me to know how I feel, and let you go as lightly as song.
Your 2024 collection, Girl, engages with tracing girlhood and its icons, weaving Christianity with ancient Greece and Greek myths, and the very contemporary. How did this collection come about?
Yes, well, I was asked by the West Cork Literary Festival, West Cork Chamber Music Festival, to come up with 15 poems on the rosary of the mysteries of Mary. First of all, the joyful mysteries of her conceiving and having the child. Secondly, the sorrowful mysteries, going through the passion, seeing him crucified and tortured and dying. And then the glorious mysteries of his resurrection and then hers assumption into heaven. And you know, I'm not Catholic. I was raised with Darwin on one shoulder and my father was a psychoanalyst, so there was Freud on the other. And I wasn't taught to pray. But I came to religion really through singing, because I did a lot of singing, and you know, the whole history of the whole tradition of choral music is in Britain, apart from folk song, is sacred. So I respond through music to that. And I was very interested in trying to do, you know, the first poem, Mary, is a sort of a teenager in a Primark t-shirt and faced with this extraordinary thing, an angel coming through the window and telling her. And she could have said no. That's the extraordinary thing. She could have said, what if she'd said no? But she didn't say no. So I went on from there. And it was during lockdown, and I read a bit of theology, but I listened to the music I had to do it with. And I just looked at pictures, paintings. I got on all right, except for the flagellation I found very hard. Because I had to do, there were 15 poems, and there are 15 poems, beads of the rosary. And you have to do one of each, and it's a sort of snapshot of what happens in the story. And my goodness, they go to town on the flagellation, some painters. And then I found the Mary's resurrection difficult too. But anyway, I had those 15 poems. Meanwhile, I also was asked to do 15 other poems about Cretan snake goddesses. And I used to live in Crete, and I like all that. That was lovely to do. So I had these two runs of, you know, I had 30 poems like this. And I took them to my editor, and she said, but there needs to be something in the middle. And I decided to do my own life as a girl, or my own thoughts about girlhood, starting with my mother as a girl, photograph of her. I got a lot of photos out. And I think maybe I work a lot through photos and paintings. And and then my daughter, and then what's happening to girls around me. I mean, I teach quite a lot, so I talk to 17, 18, 20-year-olds a lot. And how are girls now? How do they feel about this terrifying world and this rising, hockey-sized wave of misogyny that's coming across. So that's why, that's how it started. And so that, in a way, became the centre of the book. And we had lots of different titles for it. In the end, we just gave up and called it Girl.
If I may ask you a follow-up question, you mentioned working through photographs and paintings. Would you elaborate a little bit more on that? You know, do you tend to look at a frozen moment in time and imagine the life that had been led in that period, or perhaps a still moment, and then that becomes a poem? Or
I think it varies, but I think probably I have quite a visual imagination. When I when I listen to music in different keys, I imagine them in different colours. Days of the week are different colours for me. Mondays yellow, Tuesdays blue, etc. Wednesdays reddish brown. Saturdays are kind of silver. So I think that's one part of things. And then if I see a painting, I go to. It excites me so much to go to an exhibition that I don't go very often, because I want to see how the artist has organised things, what they are trying to suggest and reveal through how they've placed things, the colours, the lines, everything, the gaze. So that's one thing, is trying to work out what somebody intends to offer me. But then with photographs, it's sometimes I would be remembering or questioning or noticing something I never knew about that person before, or myself, or whatever it is. So I think it's different things. And I think probably every poem starts with a question, with a curiosity. You never know where a poem is going to take you. So while I was working on this book, I looked up what the Urban Dictionary said about girls, how it defined a girl. So this is really a found poem from lots of different definitions, all of them, I think, written not by girls. Definition in the Urban Dictionary: girl. Most important thing in my life, but also what I'll never get. Adorable, intolerable, pure sexy, sometimes downright creepy. Amazing package that comes in differing flavors. Mythical creatures, not real. Hey, do girls exist? No. Some people believe a gender called girls exists because online games allow them as characters. If you think an avatar's really a girl, guy in real life sets you straight. An underestimated being, cruelly treated, kind of like a dolphin. Irrational, illogical, emotional thing in constant need of attention that bleeds every month and uses too many emojis. Comparatively innocent form of a woman, or an airplane, I don't know. Slang for property, crack cocaine, opposite a boy. They break your heart, lead you on, say they love you, make you feel awesome. In the end, it's all a lie. What the hell is that? I think it's a girl. A female that has to tell people often she's not a girl, but a woman. Usually in the kitchen, asked to get a guy food. Girls are kind, but some are not. Choose wisely on your words. They trick us, confuse us, and if you're lucky, they please us. A thing with big hair and lower salary that later transforms to a gold digger, makes a choice, but then doesn't like it. Something for guys to put their dicks in, and acting scared gets you called like a girl. Since I wrote these poems, even since the book came out, more and more instances of rising misogyny around the world in the highest powers of the land, of every land, but particularly now America, who the first action, the first day Trump took office, one of the first things he did, a friend of my daughter's sent me the pictures, his people covered all the portraits of female astronauts in the Astronauts Hall of Fame in California. They covered the women with sacking. It sort of beggars belief. Anyway, I'm calling that that old tin can. That old tin can. Camden, late Saturday night, a place where 5 roads meet. Tense under the surface, like walking through swing doors of a saloon not knowing what's to come. The 2 mouths of the station, entrance and exit, jammed, full of the underworld. New souls all the time. Some at the end of their evening. Some heading for the clubs. Girls with bare legs up to their thighs. They never wear tights because why should they? They'll be fine. Girls with delicate goth makeup, black lacing over their cheeks, silver piercing their lips. Girls picking their way through skunk-laden air, past men sprawled on the pavement, sticking out their feet. Girls bunching close. Girls keeping their phones in pockets and bags. Girls glancing over their shoulder, just a flick of the eye, not turning their head. For girl is knowing when you have to be afraid, but going on wearing the armor, having fun, to the edge where every move has its rules. But one on her own, shrunk face, darting eyes, blood down her chin, or is it a cold sore, hurries into night like furies are after her. And a small hesitant woman in a fleece, maybe she's a girl too. What is a girl? We are all at risk here, or that's how it feels. She looks up and down, lifts a small white dog in a dog coat, and carries it through a cluster of young men at the bus stop, while a loose tin can keeps being kicked around. It gets everywhere, rolling in the wind, mind of its own, echoing like an alarm call in the forest when a tiger's on the move. And as I pass another bunch of boys, one says, "Misogyny," quite loud, at the end of some banter I don't hear, like it's a tin can, a laugh. And I've just the way he kicks it so the can keeps rolling at the end of the poem.
The journey as a stepping stone for stunning lyrical explorations of the human condition is how your work has been described by a critic. I know you have physically travelled extensively, and I read that there is a palpable closeness to Greece and India, and you've already mentioned Greece. I'd love to know how your connections to different shores have influenced and informed your writing.
Yeah. That comment came in a review of this book, Emerald, which is about my mum and when she died. And so it's got quite a lot of India in it because I was going to Jaipur just about the time when she started dying. And I said, okay, I'm not going. And she said, of course you must go. She forced me to go. You never, I mean, you basically, on the whole, you did what my mum said. And she was okay when I got back, so that was all right. But I had been working on emeralds and the colour green, which then became the colour of renewal and hope after she died and so on. But it meant it was India, but also my daughter's married to a Colombian, and the Indians worked Colombian emeralds, I discovered. So there was sort of Colombia in that book and also India in that book. And I think probably, maybe as a result of having always worked on Greece and in college, and I feel particularly at home in trying to understand the other, another culture, another place, a new place, a new and animals as well. I think you know, we ourselves here, and we're interested in ourselves. God, are we interested in ourselves? But it's healthy to be interested. It takes you out of yourself to be interested in what's different from you, as well as what's the same as you. And I think that's the root of it. And so I have travelled a lot in Greece because I've lived in Greece on and off since I was 20. But in the last 15 years, I've been going a lot to India. My brother was married in India, and I have a lot of Indian friends. And because of conservation, because of the king cobras and because of the tigers and so on, I go there a lot. And I want to understand. I think I want to understand as much as I can about parts of the world that entice me and offer themselves interesting things for me.
Your book, 52 Ways of Looking at a Poem, championed modern poetry and its role in everyday public and private life. And it is one of the most accessible books of its kind I've read. And I know a number of aspiring poets who had found this book so very useful to start their poetry journey. How did this book come about?
Yes, so in about 1998, I think, I started writing a column in The Independent on Sunday, which about how to, anyway, read a poem. Only I didn't want it to be how to, it was how I read a poem. And the literary editor at the time was Susie Fay. She said, let's do 6 pilots, and I had 200 words each. And the top editor of the paper didn't think, who wants to read about poetry? Honestly, I mean, he'd been a sports journalist. Who wants to read about poetry? But it turned out a lot of people did, and they got lots and lots of letters over those 6 weeks saying, please could you make them longer? Please can we have more of these? So then it went up to 600 words. And I alternated men and women. And you know, at that time, it felt to people like so many women. People said, how wonderful to have so many women. In fact, it was equal numbers. I think that battle's been won now, but it wasn't won then. And the poet had to be alive. So I did that for about 5 years. And I wrote 2 books out of it. The first was 52 Ways of Looking at a Poem. The second, which I think actually a better book, is called The Poem and the Journey. It's also a little hardback. You can get it for sort of £5 on, World of Books or something. And it's very interesting to have those 2 books together because 52 Ways came out in 2002. And I very much wanted to focus on the poem, not on the poet. When journalists write up poems, they write about the poet. And if they're good looking or there's a scandal or something, they like that even better. I just wanted to focus on the work. And so I would say a little bit about the poet, but at that point, you didn't do creative writing in university. Poets were not teaching in universities. There weren't poets weren't in universities. But we were journalists, teachers, a lot of teachers. Simon Armitage was a social worker. What else? Publishers, some were publishers. They were doing lots of different things. Mike Donaghy, wonderful poet, he had a series of jobs. I remember one of his jobs, he tended to get sacked from them, but one of his jobs was taking people around Highgate Cemetery, for instance. So I just sort of said that, and I explained in the preface that unlike America, British and Irish poets, not in universities. The second book, Poem and the Journey, came out in 2005. That's 3 years later. In that book, all I had to say in talking about the poet was which university they were teaching creative writing in. So within those 3 years, the whole landscape changed. And there were poets in universities, poets doing PhDs, poets doing creative writing here, there, and everywhere. And you're seeing the results of that now because there are a whole lot of different results in the poets and in the poetry, which is very interesting. But in a way, now that universities are retracting, it's a disaster. So anyway, that's another story.
Yes.
But so that's how it came about. And eventually I went through several editors at the top of the paper, and eventually they realized that people did like this. The letters, I got about 10 letters a week for about 4 years. And then so what was it called? It was called the Sunday Poem. But then a new editor came in and said, well, what's all this writing underneath the poem? We don't need that. We'll just have the poem. So according to my spies on the paper, it was sort of absolutely forbidden to mention that the Sunday poem had completely changed and now there was no longer writing underneath the poem, there was just a poem itself. It's extraordinary, the battle about poetry that there was, and the battle about reading poetry and the battle about literary attention. And I didn't say how to read a poem, I just said this is how I read it. And I love doing it, yeah.
And I think that is such a necessary part of developing your, I guess, your sense of aesthetics as a poet, and knowing what is good when an authority figure had sort of, earmarked a poem to be wonderful, and then you kind of, you, as a writer, you can look at it and say, well, okay, I now need to work out, what is so good about it, and there wasn't enough of that, really.
Yeah, it's not only aesthetics, it's about craft. It's seeing how well made it is. Mm-hmm. Like a chair. I mean, you have a chair, it has to sit squarely on the ground. Mm-hmm. It has to hold you. It has to be strong enough. The joints have to be okay. A chair that doesn't stand up properly or collapses when that's no good. It's not a proper chair. Mm-hmm. Just as Coleridge said, a bad poem is not a proper poem.
I loved your Beethoven variations, Poems on Life. Those sort of explorations of musical themes, as is found in so many of her other works. And you were, of course, a writer in residence at the Royal Opera House in 2014, I believe, and is interested in ancient music and had been part of 2 choirs that I read about. I'd love to know what role music plays in your poetry, although you've touched briefly on it earlier.
Yeah, well, a lot of singing, of course, but also I came from a family, my father came from a family, a Germanic family, which had always been sort of playing violins, violas and cellos, and playing string quartets and orchestras and so on. So we were brought up doing that too. And my instrument was the viola. So that Beethoven book is very much a string player's book, and I like the viola because it's inside the other voices. You can hear the violin on top of you, you can hear the cello beneath you, and there aren't very many voices. I don't like a very noisy music. I like intimate music, and so I was concentrating really. I went through poems on a life and on Beethoven's life, but also inside that there was my own life, as when I first played Beethoven, and then then when I played the viola in a college opera, and Beethoven played the viola too, so I was possibly playing a part that he had played, and so it was a delight to do that book and to do the research, and. But meanwhile, I'm also a singer, and I sing. My singing voice is higher than the viola, and so that's much more of a floaty thing. In fact, I could sing. I could read one poem from Girl, which is about singing, and I now have a sort of frog in my throat quite often when I speak, but not when I sing, which is very odd, but. There's a kind of, I feel safe when I'm singing. I feel happy when I'm singing. And it starts, because I didn't realize, of course, when I started doing all this, that misogyny, or rather the power of men over girls, became a theme. And inevitably, this came into it too, because of my headmaster. And I started when I was in primary school, my very first school I went to when I was, I suppose, 4 or 5 or something. And we had to sleep. We had a rest. I mean, I never slept, but we had to take a rug to school. And my mother had an army rug, and I never questioned that. But actually, I was lying on the relics of male violence. And I hadn't, it didn't occur to me till I was writing this book. The dark place that speaks when you sing. And the lines, the title and the lines, they're all sort of, there's a little lower bit in each line, like a kind of spoon with two handles. So each verse is like that. It's as if there's a hidden place in you. That's the lower line, and then up again. So it's a question of going into visibility and out of visibility again, something like that. The dark place that speaks when you sing. Did I sleepwalk through school? The khaki rug I lay on in rest, with owl eye brass rings at the edge. Where was it from? What had it seen? I didn't ask. Why did Mr. Allen, headmaster, shut some girls in a cupboard? Only blondes, said my friend Dinah, whose hair was mouse done. He has a complex, she said. I hardly said anything. I was too dark to be shut in cupboards. And each moment at school was a mystery I was too shy to talk in, except when we sang the Ash Grove, Allan Water, early one morning. I loved the tunes, but never asked why all the girls were forsaken and forlorn. Maybe the question lay too deep. Why all this dying and crying? Even today, when something I really need to ask snags on some unsayable wrong, I feel my throat closing and furring, and I know there is danger in the depths. The larynx I depend on is trying to protect me. I have to press down in my belly and do what I found to do then, when all I knew was my voice floating easy and free on the melody, soaring in light air where nobody got forsaken, and my throat, or shut in cupboards. And my throat said, okay, this was mine to do. Let the space within open, right down to the true, clear cave of the soul that speaks when I sing.
Wonderful.
So it's a sense of security in the structures of melody somehow. I can't explain it more than that.
What exciting projects might you be working on at present?
Okay, so I am grinding away at a book I've been doing since 2019, which is a book on elephants, to follow the tiger book and the serpent book. Because elephants seem to me to sum up our relation with them, seems to sum up our relation to all nature. And we revere them, we treat them as divine. Anybody, you have a party of 6 people, I guarantee that somebody will say, oh, I love elephants. And it's very interesting to ask them why. Usually they say because they mourn each other, or they adore their babies, or they help each other, or they remember things. And it seems that we have a sense of them as like us, even though they're fantastically different. So that's what I'm doing, and I hope I will have finished it by the end of this year.
Thank you very much for talking to me, Ruth.
It's a pleasure. Well, will you please teach me how to say that in Welsh?
Well, I think it may well be Mae'n bleser.
Mae'n bleser.